everybody. This is Eddie Babbage, founder, CEO of Timeline Genius, your host here of the Wedding Industry Insider Podcast. And I have a truly exciting episode that really has just been years in the making. I am here with Brigid Horne-Nestor. Brigid is the founder of I Do Weddings and Events in Cincinnati, and you all are about to meet one of my absolute favorite people in our industry, a friend, and what people don't know and we will talk about is that Brigid is also very, very critical to the founding of Timeline Genius. I would say actually the idea came from Brigid. I will explain all of this, and also she's been in business for years. I'll brag on you a little because I never hear you do it on yourself, Brigid, but she's very successful at what she does. And I know that she has tons of wisdom to share that's going to be helpful. So, Brigid, thank you so much for carving time out to be here to do this interview with me.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those who don't know you, Brigid, would you mind just kind of giving the overview of your background and telling us how you got to be where you currently are in the wedding industry?
Sure. So I started, as many people do, someone who was perceived as being organized and helpful on, event days, wedding days, and I started doing it on the side. I was a corporate event planner by choice, but also on the side, I started picking up just social events and weddings for friends and family. And I began to discover that I liked that more than what I was doing. And eventually I was in a position where I was asked to transfer or take a layoff package, and I decided not to go. And I took the layoff package and I started my business. And I was very lucky because I started out by teaching a class at a local university. And there was a local news reporter who had heard about the class and decided to do a story on the class about wedding planning. It was at a time when wedding planners were rather new, I guess, not as common as they are today. And she wanted to talk to her audience about what a wedding planner did and how they could help plan a wedding. And bonus for me, her newscast followed Oprah. So for about a full 45 minutes before she aired my segment, every time there was an Oprah commercial break, she would come in and say, and up next we have a wedding planner who's going to talk about how to plan a wedding, and all you brides and mothers of the brides out there, be sure to tune in. She must have said that, 4 or 5 times until it was time for it to air. And the segment aired. She put my phone number up on the screen, which back in the olden days we didn't have websites, so that was it. Yeah. And my phone started ringing immediately. So I like to call that my Oprah moment.
What year are we talking about there, Brigid?
That was 1997. Roughly. When I was teaching my class. Yeah. And then I booked enough weddings from that TV interview to actually really start the business in earnest. And I was doing weddings pretty much full time and incorporated in 1999. So a long time ago.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. It's funny how sometimes there are these sort of like pivotal moments. I mean, I guess every moment in life is pivotal in its own way, assuming I can talk today. But that, for you, was this real sort of like fork in the roads of fate. Like, as you look back, like, how do you sort of feel about, the trajectory of your career from that sort of, serendipitous start to now?
I feel very grateful. I feel very humbled by it, honestly, too, because I think had that not happened and had I not booked all those weddings right away, I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to believe that I could do it full time. And so that really made a difference for me, being able to feel like I could make something of this thing I love doing and turn it into a career and not just a hobby.
What are some of the biggest changes? And I know we talked very briefly in the pre-interview, our audience, they know I'm definitely going to get into some of these actionable things because I know there's something in particular that you mentioned that is going to be really valuable for planners to hear you speak about. But before we get to that, what sort of changes have you seen, looking at our industry evolve, especially as a planner, since the late 1990s to today?
I I think the major change really was the internet and the ability of people
Yeah.
not just to get information online, but to get inspiration online. So I would say very long time ago when I first started, people were less concerned about the way the wedding looked and more concerned about maybe the logistics and that it flowed well and that people were having fun and that things were running on time and that sort of thing. So I think over the years I've seen a big shift in how the aesthetics of a wedding are just as important to people as the logistics. You know, are all the vendors showing up at the right time? Are they doing what they've been paid to do? But more than that, does it look the way the couple wants it to look? So that's been an evolving change over the past 20 or so years, really. I think I have seen people care a lot more about what other people are doing, again, with the onset of social media and, sharing
media.
what things,
Yeah.
they were doing and not wanting to copy somebody else. And, back in those days, you didn't know if you were copying somebody else, right? They just came to the wedding and had a good time, and that was that. So it wasn't as big as an issue as it is today, I think.
I love that. Yeah, it's just I feel like I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't kind of get your perspective, because not everybody has that vantage point of being able to see. And I feel like, they always say that, the past repeats itself. Like it's beneficial to know the history of something, even as you think about the future.
Well,
The
it's
other
so
thing
funny
that
you
I
say that,
definitely
Eddie,
want to do,
because
yeah.
I was just thinking of the fact that you said history repeats itself. So I remember also another change was photography, for example. There was this idea that in photography, at least then, everything had to be perfect and you wanted it to be absolutely crisp and clean images. And over the years, you've seen it get to be more popular now to have like a little bit of blurry and a little bit of more realistic, and people are craving the opposite of that. So yeah, you're right. It comes full circle, I think.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. I feel like I'm old enough too. Like I see TV shows that come out or movies that come out. Like we just saw the Mario Brothers movie. I'm like, that was just as much for people that were, like me, 9 years old playing Mario Brothers as it is for my kids. But a lot of these themes and ideas, at least the ones that are good, they get recycled and they kind of come back. So the other thing, kind of tangentially related to this notion of the vantage point you have is just the experience that you have, Brigid. And what I want to do, I just like the idea of being a student of success. I just believe if there's something you want to do, if you can find somebody that's done it, figure out what they did, you can really save yourself a lot of time. And I know that a lot of people listening right now, and I'm not trying to paint the picture that you don't have any stresses, because that never stops as long as we have a pulse. If you're in business, you're going to have challenges. But in many respects, I know enough about you and your company to know that you've reached a point that a lot of other people that are doing wedding planning are trying to reach. You have a business that's meeting your needs financially, that you're running, not the other way around. And it hasn't just happened overnight, but I want to have you kind of open up and share, for starters, if you had to pick one thing that you would point to that's most responsible for getting you to the point of success where you currently are. What is one of those things that you would point to?
I think it has been targeting the type of client I want to work with and then building my marketing and pricing structure around that and being okay with saying, no, I'm not the right fit for you. And not in any sort of derogatory way, but just a very honest way, and saying, I think you'll be better served by somebody else. Because when you let things go, that opens you up to attract and retain the things that really will make you grow in the way that you want to.
Brigid, that is so powerful, and I don't want to gloss over it. Like, we're going deep down that little rabbit hole right there. And you know me, like I study business, have had multiple businesses. Like what you're saying right there is so powerful and fundamental. This notion of knowing who you're for. Like if you're marketing to everybody, you're marketing to nobody. And I know, because I've stepped in this bear trap too. You may have too at some points previously in your career of like,
Yeah.
I want to be everybody. I don't want to turn anything down. It's a little scary. Like, talk to me a little bit more about how you came to learn this lesson of I need to have a target market. I need to stand by that and be willing to tell me how you stepped into the application of that lesson.
I think it was trial and error and making mistakes in the beginning. I think that it's easy to think that the more you work, the number of weddings you do is somehow equated with that's how successful you are. And, the bigger that number, the better. But what I found was that really was a source of burnout and not being able then to be fully present to the clients that I should be fully present to. I think I was over-delivering on services that I didn't necessarily charge for. And it became something where I started to think, well, if I'm going to give up my weekends and be away from my children and my husband, it has to be worth it. It has to feel like it's worth it. And I came up with a number in my head of what I wanted to make if I was going to be working, and I stuck to it. And that really helped. And I believe that when you feel you are worth that, you exude that in your conversations with people, and you attract that type of client. Because once you start on that path, those other clients refer new clients to you. And typically people that know each other and refer business or businesses to one another are similar. So it just opened up a new pipeline of clients that I was not aware I could market to.
That's really interesting. And did you go through a lull? Well, first of all, let me take one step even further back. And I'm reflecting back again when we first started, when we first got acquainted with each other, and just there were people that helped influence in just the same way that I hope that somebody listening to you right now is having a mindset shift. There were people, right, like Marley Major, Sasha. Can you tell me where were the kind of inputs that helped reframe the way you were thinking about your pricing and charging for your time?
Well, honestly, I think it might have even been my local market, because what I started to recognize was that the DJ would come in and perhaps have a conversation for an hour or two before the wedding, maybe set up an hour or two before the guests arrived, be there for the 4 hours or the 5 hours, and then leave, and was making the same that I was making. And I was charging basically what they were charging for half a day's work. I was quoting as my price for planning an entire wedding. And when I realized that, I thought that's not right, but that's totally within my control to change. And I began to look around and see other vendors that had done that already, not planners necessarily, but photographers, for example, who really felt like they wanted to pare down how many events they were doing. And the way they did that was by raising their prices. And yes, the people that you also mentioned were people who talked about, I loved that book, Are You Making Any Money, right? Like the idea that you're so busy, but what is it saying on, at the end of at the year, when you're looking at your profit, what is your profit? So that was very helpful. Yeah. And it became okay to talk about it. And that was very freeing to have a conversation with other planners and say, how does this work for you? And I was lucky to be in a community where people felt that was okay to share.
Yeah, and I've seen your pricing evolve even in the time since we've met. When you first started, I'm trying to figure out how to give the right sort of prompt here to get the information, because everybody listening knows it's not just as simple as, okay, Brigid just told me to raise my prices. I'm going to raise my prices, and all of these benefits that she talked about are going to flow my way. I'm not going to be overworked. I'm going to have profit. We all know it's not that easy, or maybe it is, but what are the steps in your mind that both psychologically and practically, that somebody needs to take in order to raise their prices and to benefit from this sort of model that has worked so well for you?
I love that question. What I think a planner needs to do is recognize that different services within their packages have different value, and there are different ways to charge for things. So, for example, there are people that include design as just included. That's just something we offer instead of calling it a separate service. The way I prefer to think about it is there's planning. So that's getting everybody lined up for the actual jobs that need to happen that day. There's design, which is all about making it look beautiful. And there's coordination, which is tying everything together. I charge separately for all three things. And when I work on design, because I'm handling rentals and tents and linens, I charge an upcharge, a percentage of what that total bill is. And that has been business changing. Absolutely.
And, this goes to something, Brigid. You were the first person to mention a lot of things to me about the wedding industry. You're kind of like my sensei, mentor, originally kind of entree into the industry in a lot of ways that, again, we'll get to in a minute. But I remember early on you saying, Eddie, there are kind of three buckets that wedding planners fit into. One bucket is they thrive on the logistics, right? The next bucket is they're more like on the design. And then there's like a slightly lower percentage of people who are kind of the ambidextrous, I do it both, right?
Right.
I happen to know that your, like inner being is just very drawn to logistics, right? What do you do if you're a planner hearing what you just said about charging for this design piece? If they're like, but the logistics is my bag, like that's what I do. Like, what counsel would you give to that person?
My counsel to them is to look around and find someone that can partner with you, not necessarily as an employee, but maybe as a subcontractor who will work with you on design. It might even be a florist in your community that is really talented and wants to do more than just talk about bouquets and, centerpieces. Maybe it's somebody who's really dying to have the opportunity to express that side of themselves in a different way, who would be your partner in this. And whether you would subcontract on an hourly basis to that person, or in some cases, if you were lucky enough to be able to have the revenue coming in to hire somebody part-time or full-time, that's what I would always recommend. Surround yourself with people who are better at the things that you don't do well or don't enjoy doing, and then you can focus on the things that you are excellent at doing.
Yeah, no, that's very sage advice there. So, and for you, is that how you approach the design piece of this? Like, were you working with other people and kind of importing that skill set? Like, is that how you approach that?
I was lucky to be in a position where I had a full-time employee who had expressed an interest in doing more design and was very good at it. And all I had to do was set her free. All I had to do was say, go for it. Show me what can you do to grow our business?
And that's
trust,
exactly what you just advised, right? Yeah, trust and get somebody in,
people.
100%. It's funny, this guy, Steve Schwartzman, who built Blackstone, political views aside, like he built a redonkulously successful, actually, no, it was Ray Dalio, another hedge fund guy who he wrote this book called Principles. And his whole thing is like, he said that we as business owners, and even if you're a wedding planner, if you have a business, you're a business owner, right? Like,
right.
He said one of the critical flaws that people make is like, they feel like they have to be good at everything, and nobody's great at everything. So just like you said, if you know logistics, if you can find that person to add to your team, so that's interesting. So that's what you did, adding, it's Karen, I assume, right? Like having her on the team to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing.
And she enjoyed it,
Also
and she was really good at it, and it just grew exponentially because I really just said to her, do it. Do it how you want to do it. I didn't put any restrictions on her. I just said, let's try this and see where it goes. And it changed everything.
You know, Brigid, I think we just hit on something else, and it's related to this notion of charging what you're worth, which is you stopped trying to do everything all by yourself. You found somebody who was a game changer for you. Talk to me a little, because I know a lot of planners, they're thinking, well, I don't want to pay money to have like, now I got somebody on payroll and I got to like, tell me a little bit more about that trust fall, because there's fear around taking on a payroll. There's fear around, can this person really do a great job? Are they going to preserve my reputation? Tell me a little bit about the impact of bringing the right person onto your team. And yeah, just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think the impact was it gave me a level of freedom that I hadn't experienced before. It got us to the point where we didn't have to take every wedding to make me feel okay. It got us to the point where I could say, we're charging enough and we're making enough on the rental items that we're reselling, basically, and the products that we're reselling, that our profit is there and there's that cushion. And we were always very transparent. We were not hiding anything. You know, all of our proposals and contracts said exactly how we charged, and we were upfront and honest, you know, about if people had questions, we said, yes, we charge an upcharge on your rentals. That is part of our service fee. And if they weren't okay with that, then that was all right, that they would go find somebody else. But luckily, there are a lot of people who would really like to have you do the work, and they're going to pay you what you ask because they want you and they think you're the best for their wedding.
That's so interesting, Brigid. It's almost like these things all work together, right? If you're not charging the right amount, there's so many other things that are going to be adversely impacted by that. Not the least of which is you probably won't have enough revenue to bring on the help that you need to really keep growing, right?
Absolutely.
Like this all kind of fits together, right?
And it's a scary first step, no doubt. You have to be, I think, ready to go down before you go up, right? I mean, I remember the first year that I had a full-time employee, I took a pay cut, and that was okay. I was in a position where that was not going to affect me so negatively that I would need to, you know, do something else. I was always able to keep doing wedding planning, and I just readjusted expenses and eventually figured out that formula. You just have to make more per wedding is what it comes down to. And the way you make more per wedding is by doing not just the coordination, but the planning, the design, and the coordination. And I know there are people out there who love to do day of, which is a misnomer. There's no such thing as day of, but you know, those people exist, and I get that. But I think if you're ever going to be in a position to not be concerned about having a certain number of weddings, you need to figure out a fee structure that has a bigger profit per wedding.
Yeah, I love that, Brigid. And you know, so in hearing this, there's a fear that everybody has of, if I raise my prices, there are a lot of fears that conjures up, not the least of which is people saying, I'm not going to pay it. And, you know, a related feedback point that could be scary is like, you're not worth it. I mean, that hits right here, right? I think somewhere deep down, that's a fear factor. Have you heard that from people over the years? Do you get that? Does it just roll off? Like, is that fear something that you've really had to grapple with over the years? Like,
I heard it just last week. There are still people who say that.
And what happens? Yeah.
Well, I've gotten really good at saying, I understand that we're not the best fit for you. I still hope you have a fabulous wedding. I wish you nothing but the best. And it was a pleasure meeting you. And that's where I leave it.
Yeah,
you know, I try to be very positive. I don't take it personally because it's not personal. And I think that's something we all have to get over. It's not personal, right? it has more to do with how they feel about themselves and their budget than it has anything to do with you. And I've never been told you're not worth it. I've been told I'm not going to pay that. I've been told I don't think
Yeah,
that that makes sense for me. But I haven't had
yeah,
people be downright mean about it. And that's okay. It's
right.
okay if I'm not the right fit because I'm not. I'm not the right fit for everybody. But the people that I'm the right fit for, I will fight like hell to get that client because that's who I want my
Yeah.
calendar filled with. People that appreciate what I do and compensate me in a way that allows me to do half the number of weddings I used to and still probably make more.
I love that, Brigid. And I know that you're on the higher end of your local market. How does that, like, how do you sell that? How do you present that, knowing that, especially, today, talk about changes from the late 90s, and you spoke to this. One change is also there are a lot more wedding planners, right? Like in the world today than there were. And you know that better than I, but knowing that there are other planners and that not everybody has applied this, like there are others that are like, well, I'll just compete on price. I want to have low price, so when a couple sees me, they're like, oh, that's, yeah, I'll take it, like at that price, so that those other offerings are out there. How do you present your services and pricing in a way that still works given that reality?
My clients are not interested in those planners. Nothing personal. I don't think there's anything wrong with those planners. I really don't. I'm sure I was one at one time. I was the same person in the beginning of my career, trying to do as many as I could, and I would work for less than I should. But, eventually I changed that. But everybody has to start somewhere. And so I don't begrudge those people those weddings. There is a market for that. There is a planner that's made for every type of wedding, and we're all at different stages. And it's okay to be in that position. It doesn't mean you'll have to stay there, but one of the ways that you get out of that position, I feel, is when you get to the end of the year and you feel exhausted and you feel like it wasn't enough money to make it worth it. And then you get pretty serious about, well, if I'm going to keep doing this on the weekend and leaving my family and friends and missing all sorts of things from, if you're a mother, children's recitals, soccer games, like that's a lot to give up. You're a dad and it has to be worth it. So I think that was really when it started to hit home for me. But again, I feel like those aren't the people that I'm marketing to, and that's okay if they tell me they can't afford me. In fact, I don't even interview with those people because I screen them in a way that I tell them up front, this is the range that I'm in. And if this is not your range, thank you so much, but I'm going to pass or refer you on to somebody who I think will do a great job, who will charge less. I give out people who are my competition. I give out those names all the time. And I don't think of them as my competition. I think of them as my community. And I support them. And, it makes me feel good to do that, really.
Yeah, that's really cool, Bridget. Yeah, it just takes a real, I think, hefty dose, maybe less so today than in the early days, but a hefty dose of like courage and self-assuredness to kind of lean into this idea of charging what you're worth and being okay with people going. I remember talking to you one time, and you said something that I thought was so powerful, where you were just like, every year, and this is somewhat unique to, I mean, there are other businesses that are this way, but definitely in the case of wedding planners, there's no genie that shows up midway through the year and says, hey, guess what? You're totally going to be okay for next year and the year after. So there's always, no matter how great of a year you have, there's
Right.
this fear of like, what about next year, right? Like, I mean, you might get a few bookings, but most people I know don't have a full calendar 24 months out. Like, do you think it's important to manage that fear and other similar fears? Let me just start with that. Do you find that that's something that you actively, a lot of people talk about manage your mindset and don't stay stuck on channel scarcity. Is that something that over the years you've tried to be intentional about? Oh, let me let go of this fear. Like, just talk to me a little bit about the fears that have come up over the course of your career and the way you've managed them.
Yeah, well, that's just it. That's absolutely true, is you don't know what the year is going to bring. And it's usually, for me, around March when I start to get a little nervous and I think, oh, what's it going to be like? What's going to happen this year? And I think that's completely human. None of us knows what's going to happen, especially after
Absolutely.
COVID. I mean, that came from out of nowhere. That, for many people, 2019 was one of the best wedding profit years of all their career. And then, boom, 2020 hit. So, yeah, it's typically around March that I think, but I do just tell myself to be quiet. I say to myself, it's March. This happens every March. Just get over it and keep working and doing what you're supposed to do. And it always turns out fine. And that's what so many other planners will say to me as well, is that it's it doesn't serve them well to worry. And so to try to tell yourself that it's okay to put those fears aside and just concentrate on the things that you can control, not what you can't control.
As a wedding planner, you know how important it is to create detailed wedding day timelines for your events. But creating your timelines can be a tedious and time-consuming job. Until now. Because Timeline Genius lets you create beautiful, detailed wedding day timelines with ease. And it keeps everything you need on the wedding day in one central place. Here's how it works. First, Timeline Genius saves all your clients, vendors, and venues in your Rolodex, so you don't lose time looking for their information. And when you're ready to create a new timeline, you simply enter the key information for your wedding. Click a button, and voila! Timeline Genius magically gives you a customized timeline for your event, where all the details are laid out and the times are calculated for you. From there, you can easily edit your timeline by adding or deleting items, inserting images, changing font styles, and customizing everything to your liking. You can also instantly shift the times for as many items as you want. And when it comes to your clients and vendors, Timeline Genius lets you give them the highest level of service. You can send them tailored timelines, showing only the items they're involved in. And you can collaborate by inviting them to a mobile-friendly, web-based version of the timeline. You can even set text message reminders to automatically go out on the wedding day. And once you've completed your perfect timeline, you can download it or email it out as a beautifully styled PDF. And that's Timeline Genius, a smart software that will help take your wedding planning to the next level. Start your free trial today.
I'll tell you, Brigid, in the years, and one of the cool things, like, you're a friend of mine. I've had the privilege, you know my family, vice versa. We've been talking, for years, and it's cool because you see the evolution of a person, personally, for business, and I feel like for sure one way that I've evolved in the time since we've met each other, because I'm constantly studying business and entrepreneurship. It's just like what lights me up, what I think about is this real connection between like what's going on in here and what's going on in the outer world. For anybody listening, I'm pointing to my head, the inside of my head that nobody can see. But like, they say what we focus on expands. So if you're dwelling in that place of fear, and I love that you're, again, secure enough, open enough, vulnerable enough to say, yeah, every year around March, I get scared. Is it going to be okay? And I think anybody listening, if you don't have fears, you're lying to yourself or just mistaken, because I know I do, day in and day out. But I think it's really important as business owners and entrepreneurs to when we catch our minds doing that, to reset and say, wait a minute, no, let me focus on my goal. Like, let me dwell on that. Let's focus on like all the things that have happened that I'm grateful for, the successes I've had. Not that you're ignoring challenges, but that you are kind of managing that mindset. I don't know. Does that resonate with you in all candor?
It definitely does. I think the other thing that I'll do proactively when I start to feel that way is to go back over my past few years and just gather some data and see how many weddings did we do? What were we charging? How many services did we offer? That's one of the reasons I stopped offering wedding day coordination as a standalone option. The only way I'll do that is if there's like 3 months till the wedding. I'm not going to take a wedding weekend coordination that's a year out or 6 months out, most of the time I don't do it at all. But if it's like somebody that we helped before, or, you know, a friend or something like that, I'll consider it. But it's not something I'll offer from the beginning, because if you offer that and then you book a weekend, you preclude yourself from a full service wedding, you know? So I think just kind of teaching yourself patience and being confident that what you are seeking will come to you if you just allow it. You have to clear the path. You can't clutter up your calendar with weekend coordination if you really know that you can make more profit doing full service. So you just have to teach yourself patience, I think, and some data, because I think that's, you have to prove it to yourself. You have to prove to yourself that you felt this way last March and then you were okay. Why were you okay? Because you did enough weddings and you charged enough for them.
So Brigid, what does somebody do? And I realize this is like a whole other sort of interview where if we wanted to go that next level down and get into the mechanics of pricing, so I won't go all the way down to the bottom, but at the same time, I feel like it wouldn't be cool if I just left it here and gave no practical sort of like, okay, I want to charge more, but how? I've heard about percentage based, I've heard about flat rate, like I've heard about hybrid. Like, what do you tell people, or where would you point them if they're interested in changing their pricing? Like, what concrete models or references would you direct people to?
I would say, for me, what has worked the best is the flat rate with a percentage. So that way I'm guaranteed a certain amount. It's almost like a retainer. I don't leave my house for less than whatever this is. And then with the expectation that if we do the design and the planning as well, that flat rate's going to be higher. And then that percentage has gone up over the years. I used to charge 10% of the rentals and the other services or products. Then I started charging 15%. Now I charge between 20 and 25%. So that's the advice I give most people who come to me and say, I don't know if I'm going to make enough. What should I do? I'll say, raise your percentage. You know, if you're charging 10, charge 12 now. If you're charging 12, try 15. Little changes, little incremental changes will, again, give you the courage to keep doing that. And it is something that I would say most people should do most every year, is reevaluate and say, do I need to go up by another $1,000 on my flat rate? Do I need to increase my percentage on rentals by another 2 or 3%? And eventually you'll get to that point where it feels very fair and comfortable, and it gives you the cushion you need to do 10 or 12 high-end weddings versus 35 weekend coordination jobs.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful, Brigid. And, you know, one other thing that I just couldn't help but note and want to kind of just go back to is where this came from for you. It sounded like you kind of hit this point. Like they say sometimes that like frustrations can lead to positive results, meaning you reach a point where you're like, I'm tired of this. Like, I don't want to be this out of shape, or I don't want to be broke anymore, so I'm going to get intentional about my money. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about like the emotional context that led to your kind of changing? Because it sounds like you had some thoughts and feelings that kind of drove you there.
Oh, absolutely. I think for me, it was one of my kids needing private school education because my child wasn't thriving in the public school where I had her. And I knew that I needed to do something because she needed extra attention and extra help that wasn't going to be available. And so I knew of a school where she could find that. And I knew somehow I had to figure out a way to make that a reality for her. And that's really, I think, what forced me to have the courage to take a look at the pricing and raise it. And so she was really the inspiration, I'd say. She gave me the courage, certainly, that, you know, you'll do anything for your kids. And that's just what really made it sealed the deal for me, was somebody in my family needed something that I wanted to be able to provide that I didn't think I could provide at the current rate that I was charging.
You know, that reminds me, Brigid, of something that people talk about. It's pure common sense, and it makes all the sense in the world. It's that if your why, if your purpose is strong enough, you'll figure out the how, right? Like when somebody was like, hey, this is a matter of you getting your daughter into the school where she needs to be, then you're going to figure it out. That's about like, it's like somebody coming up with a gun to your head and saying like, do this or else. You're like, what do you need? I'll figure it out. That's really powerful.
And I didn't want to work 2 jobs. That was not something that I really had any interest in doing.
Right.
And my husband was fine working a job. I thought that's the last thing I want. I don't want to spend more time away from my family.
Yeah.
I have to figure out a way to work less and make more.
I hope that other planners, I remember in the early days of us, working on Timeline Genius, it was very front and center in a way that today it may not be as much because your kids are older, but it was very front and center for you, the role that your profession played in your role as wife, as mother. And I hope that some of the other people listening, because I know there are people listening in that same boat. Like, part of the reason why you became a wedding planner was so you could hopefully have more control over your schedule, to be there for your kids. What an irony if it becomes the thing that sucks you away from all of that,
That is absolutely true, Eddie. And in this day and age, it's so much easier than it's ever been to do this type of work in your own home with Zoom and with, being able to communicate via text and email. Like, you don't have to go to a place every day to do this type of work. And so it's such a gift that we are in this industry that allows us to support a family working from home, calling your own shots, being in charge of your schedule. You just have to take the reins. You just have to take the opportunity and, I guess, envision what it is you want and then create the wedding business to support that.
I keep having the thought, Brigid, as we're talking, I'm just like, if I were a planner, and I know you don't really do coaching, because you're one of those people in my mind, like I've gotten to know so many incredible people in this industry, and I'm like, you're one of those people, like, you're so heads down doing it that you're not really out there like teaching it, talking about it, which is why I'm so happy and feel lucky that I was able to kind of pull you up, and get you into pull you up from the day-to-day and get you onto the podcast to kind of share you with people. But I just feel like if I were a junior planner right now, I would just like get my hands on whatever cash I needed, and I would email you, and I'd just be like, I want to talk to you once a week for the next like 10 weeks. And I mean, am I off base? Like, if you were a younger version of yourself right now, if you were back in year 3, I mean, I kind of feel this way when I talk to my son. I'm like, here's the thing. Daddy's been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm all the way to 45, and I'm here to tell you what lies ahead. Like, it's such a simple construct. Like, don't you feel like if you were able to like mentor your former self, that you just would add just tremendous value in shortcutting the path to success? Or maybe not so much. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. I sometimes think that maybe when I was in my earlier days, I maybe thought I had it all figured out. Maybe I wouldn't have listened to me then. I don't know. I think there's something to be said for learning things the hard way. I just think that's the way they make the biggest impression. And it also gives somebody a sense of agency. I feel that that's so important to developing that self-confidence, is the opportunity to really screw things up and fix it yourself. And not that I didn't get support or ideas from other people.
Sure.
But I wonder if I would have heeded all the advice. I think also it's baby steps, right? Like you were saying, it's easy to say like, oh, just raise your prices. Well, it's super hard to do that. And I think in many ways I had to practice saying my rate is XYZ, whatever it was, so that I sounded believable when I was quoting something to somebody. I had to convince me before I could convince them.
Absolutely. Well, I guess we'd have to send you back in time and have you know, like, hey, I am your future self. You have to listen to me. I know everything that's going to happen to you. Just open your mind. You don't have it all figured out, okay? Yeah, exactly.
Right, Back to the Future Wedding Edition.
All right, speaking of time traveling, I'm going to take us both back down memory lane here. I know my memory's a little fuzzy on some things, but crystal clear on others. But what a lot of people don't know, I'm changing gears here to unabashedly talk about Timeline Genius, because as I told you in the pre-interview, there are certain facets of our company's history that I could only talk about with you, because it was really me and you going back and forth, and John Lannon, doing coding and stuff. But really, my tee up for this story, and I don't have any real structured or preordained thoughts. I just want to kind of let people hear from you, because they hear from me about Timeline Genius. I think it's really important for our company for people to hear from you. So, as you know, but I'll tell folks that don't know my kind of end of the story, I have come to believe after this is Timeline Genius is the third company that I've worked on, and I believe that we're all here to help others, right? And that lesson hit me super hard, such that in 2013, I was just looking for a problem to solve. And I was looking at a bunch of different industries. And my wife, who was a textbook DIY bride, she said, Eddie, when I planned our wedding back in 2010, it was a logistical nightmare. If you want to help people, you should talk to wedding planners. And on my birthday, ironically, August 28th of 2013, I talked to you. And I guess for starters, I don't even know if you remember those initial emails, but what made you, in the midst of, I guess we're at the tail end of the wedding season a little, but you're still really busy. What even prompted you to just get on the phone with me? Do you even remember? I mean, it might be really fuzzy at this point, but like, what was the movie like from your vantage point, kind of going into, in that first interaction?
Well, I think your approach was so earnest. You came at the email describing that you were in tech and you were trying to solve problems for people, and you wanted to talk to me about problems in the wedding industry and what problems were there that tech might be able to solve. And I was not a technical person and was intrigued to learn sort of, well, what do you think you could do to fix this or that? And I certainly had some ideas about what I would love to have different or easier to do. So I think I was just curious, what were you about? And what was it that motivated you to want to be calling wedding planners? I think I was just curious. Yeah.
And this was at a time when the wed tech and landscape was nothing like what it is today.
Very limited. Yes.
Very limited. There was just and I remember getting on the phone, and I can't remember the first idea. So I do remember that we spent 80% of the call talking about something entirely different. And then towards the end, because I was just hey, what's the biggest problem? Towards the end, you started talking about timelines. And I remember, and this is so important, to listen to people, because I was trying to steer you back to the original. I was okay, Brigid, but I think you've already told me the thing. Do you remember that? At the end, and finally, you were no, Ed, yeah. You were Eddie, no, you need to listen to me here. Yeah, the first idea was
what the first thing was.
I don't either. But I do remember at some point at the end, it was you knew, well before I knew, in that conversation, you were oh, wait a minute. You were Eddie, timelines. And the more you talk, I was kind of it's my birthday. I'm kind of ready to get off this phone. Brigid's super cool. This has been awesome. But she already told me the big problem. And then the call went for another 20 minutes. But, yeah, really, I mean, the birth of Timeline Genius really ties back to you honestly I didn't even know what a timeline was. You were the first person to tell me. And then I had, soon after that, I talked to Nora Shields, who's amazing, and, other people, Suzanne Halaska. But literally, I remember that call, and I think about it now, it's it was like a birthday gift from the universe, It's here, Eddie, happy birthday.
Cool.
Here's a problem to solve,
Yeah.
But when you got off the call, how did you sort of feel? What were your sort of thoughts about this idea of a solution to solve the timeline problem that you had been wrestling with for years?
I was hopeful. You seemed a lot more knowledgeable than anybody else out there that was talking about the problem. I think what had happened for me was somebody had presented the option of a timeline creation software, and I was so excited and really, really wanted to try it, and was utterly disappointed in what it produced. And I remember feeling like, oh man, maybe this is harder than we think it is. Like, this person really thought this was going to be a tool to solve my timeline problem. And, it didn't in any sort of a way. So I think I was hopeful because you just sounded like you kind of knew what you were doing. So I just chose to be hopeful. I feel, what have I got to lose? There's nothing out there right now that's helpful. Maybe Eddie has a solution,
And it's funny, Brigid, because I remember the moment, and it's something that I think we both kind of chuckle about now. But as with most things, it wasn't necessarily funny when it happened. But so you started working on Timeline Genius, in hours and hours and hours and hours of calls where I'm on the phone with you and we're talking about the Genius feature. And it was you. You were like, Eddie, what if you could, you're like, I don't know if you can do this, but could you maybe let me put in the specific information for a wedding and then generate the timeline based on that? And I'm like, that's not easy, but it's possible. So we'd spend hours where you're like, okay, this is the way this should work. And I'm like, Brigid, well, how much time goes between this and this? And just hours and hours of work on that. And we launched the initial version. Now, in my mind, I know we're going to iterate, we're going to constantly improve, and this initial version is not the end-all be-all of what you, because we had talked, honestly, Brigid, we're still doing things today that you and I talked about 10 years ago. Like, literally, because it takes time to build things, but like, I remember exactly what you're saying. I remember saying, okay, Brigid, now take it away, you can use it, and you were like, like that first person. I almost wish people could see it. I was like, what do you think, Brigid? You're like, it's not good.
Well, you know what? I don't even think it was the right time zone. I think it had, I think it was, right? Like, I think it was making like my wedding start at 3 a.m. or something. And I remember thinking, like, this can't be right.
Oh, geez. I so remember that. Well, tell me, Brigid, in all candor, you have been, I remember, and you do too, the earliest days, like early 2014, Timeline Genius, there would be like 5 timeline items created in a day. And now we have tens of thousands of timeline items created every day, and people all over the world using the service. And fortunately, through, in no small part, just tons of effort, especially in those early years, and time and thought partnership from you and many other beautiful, talented people, from our developers, designers. Like, fortunately, the product has come so far. What is it like, in all candor, for you as you kind of look over the evolution of Timeline Genius from the vantage point of somebody who played such a vital role in the early days of the company?
I think the way I look at it is, again, just being grateful that I took the phone call from you, and being grateful that you were sincere and really came through on that sense of wanting to help people. And your questions were so thought-provoking. And I think really that's where we came to Timeline Genius. You kept pushing me, saying, what's the thing that really is annoying? And it was pretty easy once you asked me that question, because, and again, I was doing like 35 to 40 weddings a year, which again is more than I should have been doing. But with that many timelines, it was so hard to keep things straight. And what you presented was a way to have that be organized, a way for other people on my team to be able to access that information without me having to make multiple copies or send multiple emails. You gave us such a gift with that ability to have everything organized in one place, where you can even send links to vendors, or, they can be invited to the timeline to edit or collaborate. Like, those are things that were just in the dream world at that time. And now to see it actually happening. And then again, for me to be able to tell a bride, I've made the first round of revisions, but I'm now going to grant you access if you feel you need to change the order of the hair and makeup people involved, or you need to change whose toast goes before. That's great. And I could never have felt comfortable with that before. And so you've given us the gift of time in the sense that we don't have to do everything for every client now.
It's funny, you totally just brought back memories of me, you, and Karen even trading those emails about the collaboration features. I still remember just, you remember you just have these random little frames that are like embedded in your mind. I see myself in my mom's basement talking back and forth with you, ironing out like how collaboration should work. And, for me, Brigid, part of why I was so excited, other than the fact I always just love catching up with you, and I don't get to do it as much as I would like because we're both so busy, but part of why I was so excited to have you on is because I almost feel like it's not just sometimes. I think a lot of people, associate me with Timeline Genius, and they don't realize that really I've been a lot more of a conduit than an agent than people think. And it's really by listening to people like you and the other amazing planners that we've served over the years and our team. I've certainly done work, and this isn't some like feigned humility here. This is like real talk. Like, I don't think people appreciate just how much I never could have built Timeline Genius. I wasn't even a wedding planner. Like, having you under the tent in those early days, I was getting feedback from a lot of people, but like to be able to get on the phone and say, okay, Brigid, I need you for 2 hours, right? Like to get on and to really get in and get that direct feedback. I think, the industry, in so far as Timeline Genius has been helpful to people, and I know it has, I think the industry also owes you a big hug and a fist bump for your contribution. So nice to be able to say that on a podcast.
I appreciate that. But I think of you also in the sense that, so I'm a wedding planner and I wanted to create this, and there's no way I knew how to create this. And then you come at me talking about wireframes and all these technical things about... Yeah. I didn't know what a wireframe was, and you're showing me all these
like,
diagrams.
What is this black and white thing? Is this how it's going to look, Eddie? Because that's not what we need here,
Yeah. So, it was just a good match because, you really helped in a way. And like you said, so many other planners contributed. I was so happy that you were talking to other planners as well, because obviously we don't do things exactly the same way. And it was good that you got so many different people to give input on it. So yeah, I do feel like you really gave a gift to our industry when you created the idea of Timeline Genius, for sure.
Yeah, it's weird. Like sometimes, it's funny, as you know, I'm a recovering lawyer, used to practice and math major, all that. Like I've got that logical part of my brain, but I don't know if it's just getting older, but even something as weird as you and me connecting on my birthday, you just realize, and just like, I think we were always just a really good match. Like I always found, I think it's like tied to the part of you that's really good at logistics. Like there's always been a very a good locking of minds around just like logically, practically, we just were able to always communicate. I would just get the answers I needed. And it's just weird how life works. You randomly, you have your Oprah moment, or I have my little birthday gift. It's a really beautiful thing. So I knew this time would fly, Brigid. And there's one question that I have to ask before I let you go, because I ask it of every guest. If you, based on all of your years of personal and professional experience, could give one piece of advice to the people listening, especially our planners, maybe they're where you were, trying to build their business, they want to have the profit they want to feel good and enjoy this passion they have, what would that one most helpful piece of advice be?
I would like to encourage all planners in all different places, wherever you do your work, to be the first to reach out to some other planner in your community. And with the intent of creating a support network, whether it's just the two of you, whether you eventually grow that into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whether you have 25, in the end, I think that you have to be brave, and without letting your fear hold you back, without thinking, I have nothing to offer, or I don't want this person to think I'm after their marketing plan or their business. you need to convince yourself, because it's the truth, that there are enough weddings to go around. Everybody doesn't want to do every single wedding. And so I would say what you can do is build your community around the idea that you can support one another and share information and still each have your own special niche and do your work and be able to come together and make suggestions to one another and talk about pricing and support each other in raising prices. That kind of thing makes a huge difference in the end. And I feel like, especially people who have been working for a while, this is your opportunity to give back. There were women and men in the industry, not a lot, but people in the beginning when I needed someone to bounce an idea off of, who said, absolutely, call me anytime. And these were people in my market who were being very generous with me. And I feel like we all need to have that attitude, that you're not afraid to be the person to make the first move. Have the courage to say, I think we can help each other. Let's get together for coffee or just a phone call and share some things. Then take that and grow it, right? Go out from that courage and make other people courageous, because you can really raise everyone's profile. You can raise the standard of what's happening in your area by collaborating and not being afraid to reach out to people who you might consider to be your competition.
I think that is so cool, Brigid. And it's just, what a perfect way to kind of wrap things up and put a bow on top. Like, just this notion of just not giving into that scarcity frequency, you know, of leaning into abundance. It just even fits nicely with the idea of charging what you're worth, like just being bigger than the insecurity and the fear, you know. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Would you, I know how busy you are. Let's say somebody is listening to this and they want to reach out to you. Would you ever consider doing coaching? Or are you like, no, I'm too busy with the business?
I would consider it. I guess what I've always felt is if I would do that, I wouldn't want to think of it as like a 20-week process, right? Like, I think for most people, right, they just need somebody to recognize the areas where they're stuck and to point those areas out, and then to say, how can you change this? And here are some ideas for doing that. So I would be open to that. But yeah, I'm not a believer in, I don't want to be a career wedding planner coach. I am happy to share what I have learned with others and to hopefully elevate their business. But yeah, I'm not interested in changing careers. I love wedding planning, and it's what I'm good at, and it fulfills me in many ways. So yeah, I will be a wedding planner for as long as I can be.
I love that, Brigid. And if people do want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
I would go to my website, and it's i-do-weddings.com, and my contact is right there. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
And I want to say one quick thing, too, to kind of tie back to the Timeline Genius chat. If you guys are listening, if you're a planner, go to timelinegenius.com, start a free trial, and you've heard how this came so directly from someone like you, right? Like, this came from the mind of a planner, or the combined mind of tech and design and all of this, but it's so fundamental, like, and all of the success that I think we've enjoyed to date has been due to that fact that that's really your imprint on the DNA of our company to serve other people like you, Brigid, that are working, that are wedding planners, that are, you know, trying to build their businesses. So by all means, guys, check it out. And Brigid, thank you so much for, again, just being here and sharing your pearls of wisdom with our audience today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.